The Black Lives Matter protests are still going strong across the nation, with the expectation there will be many more this weekend. People are calling for an end to systemic racism and police brutality. But how do we go about accomplishing this? In the past several years, the discussion about reparations has been hitting the mainstream. And now, with these recent protests, people are calling to defund the police, a phrase that has shock value, but perhaps a different meaning than what it appears to be. Here to give us his perspective on what changes should be made is Dr. Michael Datcher. Michael is the author of the Ferguson-era historical novel Americus and the critically acclaimed New York Times bestseller Raising Fences, as well as the author of Animating Black and Brown Liberation. Michael, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Great to see you, Kim.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And I should mention you're a good friend of mine. So, and happy birthday. Thank you for being here.
That.
So, I really would like to talk solutions. I think, we've been seeing, obviously in the news, we know what's going on. We know what the angst is for the most part. But, maybe you can kind of walk us through what do you think would help solve the problems that we're seeing right now?
That's a really important question. I think it's first to set the context, Kim, to think that the police are just individual people with a job, a really important job, a job where there really cannot be any bad apples. Just like there can't be any bad apples, for example, when you're an airline pilot. You can't every once in a while crash to the mountain, right? And so the police have a very unique job that is not for everyone. And for people who have that important job, we have to always keep in mind that the police are just people. In the last 125 years, we've had lots of people making mistakes as police officers, but now we have the advent of the cell phone, of the smartphone, which has a camera. Folks have been saying there's a spike in racism. No, there's always been racism and abuse by the police. We have a rise in cell phone use and cell phones capturing this abuse by the police. So there's that. So in terms of solutions, number one, in a very, very practical way, we have to think about this. Two things. One is that there are very, very few short-term solutions in this situation, all right? But there are a couple. One is to make it a crime, for example, aiding and abetting assault, whenever a police officer sees a fellow officer abuse someone or assault someone. That's illegal, right? For example. In the policing community, there's been a campaign for the last decade as a way to offer some context, where they're trying to get people in Black and brown communities to go against the so-called no snitching rule that many people have in certain types of Black and brown communities, where when you snitch, when you tell and report a crime, the police say that particular attitude goes against the effectiveness of law enforcement. But as we all know, there's an absolute no snitching rule among police personnel. It's called the code of silence, right? They're told not to tell on each other. So, of course, that particular irony is interesting. We have to criminalize that for sure. As I'm sure you've been reading, certain folk have already begun to do that, engage in that particular process. That's number one.
We want them to police each other, not just police us, but each other.
Not simply police them, but make it a crime, for example, an automatic aid and abet crime to whatever the crime is at hand. If it's a murder, it's aiding and abetting murder. If it's an assault of an unarmed protester who's peacefully protesting, it's aiding and abetting an assault. It's got to be a crime. There's got to be teeth in that particular crime. So that's a very direct solution right away. Now, to go on the other opposite end of this particular solution piece, I would argue that we need to understand the import of liberal arts education. In the last 25 years or so, there's been really an attack on liberal arts education as we've become more specialized in American society. Folks who major in English, folks who major in philosophy are actually demonized. Folks say, well, how do you get a job when you major in English, for example? But as we now know, with the movement that is afoot across the country, people are having an upsurge in compassion, an upsurge in understanding, and the tagline has become, let's listen more and talk less. And the value of the liberal arts education, Kim, is that it encourages understanding and it encourages the knowledge of those who are unlike ourselves, because we're seeking knowledge from a broad set of categories. So I'll just start there and I'll let you respond or ask a different question. Those are two polar opposites, but I think that in between those particular ideas, there are, of course, other solutions as well.
Yeah, so really interesting. I like that immediate idea, first of all, of holding the police accountable. Because there is absolutely a code of silence amongst them. They've also got the unions that negotiate on their behalf to make sure that that they're not punished or that they're not held accountable. We saw what happened in Buffalo, New York, where when the police officers pushed that elderly man down, where he is still in the hospital, when the police officers were punished, what was it, 56 of them resigned from that task force in solidarity of each other. Not in solidarity of us, the community, not saying, oh, because you could kind of read that headline a couple of different ways. 56 police officers resigned from the riot or whatever task force. And it's like you could think, oh, because they don't like what they see. But in reality, when you read the article, you realize, no, the reason why they were resigning it wasn't because they didn't want to police peaceful protesters, but because they were upset that they were being held accountable for the way they were treating peaceful protesters. That's outrageous.
That's a really important point. Let me jump into that point. It's really important because that's one of my solutions is to outlaw police unions. If you are a public servant, if your job is to serve and protect the public, the folks who ought to be defending you should be the public. As we know, unions essentially will almost always back the officers, even in egregious crimes. Mm-hmm. Right? So the union in Minneapolis, for example, is backing Chauvin, the officer who actually killed George Floyd. That is almost always their go-to. It isn't about trying to get to the truth, right?
Right.
It's about trying to always defend the officers. That is unacceptable when your job is to serve the public. We have got to. Solution number two, a mid-range solution, is to outlaw. We have to outlaw police unions. Why? They are not doing their job. A police union should be concerned about the police doing a great job at serving, protecting the country, the citizens, the populace, not protecting the actual folks whose job it is to police them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would go as far as, for me personally, go as far as to outlaw police unions. But certainly the thing that I find really disturbing is the fact that police unions are able to negotiate almost a different legal code that cops are able that they live by. And I mean, what other union is able to do that? I don't mind a union if it's for negotiating wages or negotiating, those types of things. But to be able to negotiate a new set of laws, that is really alarming, and that absolutely has to be outlawed.
But I have to say, listen, if your job is to serve and protect the public, the folks who ought to be in charge of negotiating the contracts should be the public, should be a publicly appointed series of individuals who are experts in the criminal industry. They should be the ones who are protecting and defending our officers, not other officers. Why? Because as we know, officers in the code of silence context will not do the right thing. Mm-hmm. Just in the same way, historically, certainly in the last decade in particular, when egregious crimes have happened, again, the union supporting the men who actually murdered George Floyd in public are saying that they will defend these officers into the nth degree. They tried to demonize George Floyd. This man was a criminal. A bunch of radical revolutionaries are trying to change the country. That is unacceptable for an organization that's supposed to serve the public.
Right.
Outlaw them.
Well, I mean, I definitely believe that they deserve defense, right? They have to have defense attorneys, and those defense attorneys are certainly going to do everything and anything they can to defend the officers. I mean, that's what we all get. Ideally, it doesn't really work out that way in our criminal justice system. But, when people don't have money, then they can't afford the lawyers. But ideally, a lawyer is supposed to be doing that for you. But definitely, I agree with you that the police, we have a problem with the unions, and that does have to be,
for sure,
that needs to be highlighted and understood. And we do have a problem with them living by a different set of laws that the rest of us don't have to live by, that they're supposedly policing us on, and yet they're not held accountable to the same thing.
Kim, the stakes are too high. The stakes are too high to allow a union to create their own laws and to, in obvious cases of misconduct, not to call out the misconduct. That union is not supporting police. They're supporting crime.
Right.
That is unacceptable for a public servant. So I just want to make that point really clear. We have to outlaw the unions.
So before we go on to your next point of a liberal arts degree, I want to kind of focus a little bit more on the police. The idea of defund the police.
Right.
Where are you on that? I mean, first of all, what does that even really mean? You know, when people hear it,
Right.
it's automatically like, what? You want to get rid of police? You want to make it, what, privatized? So we've got only the rich can afford protection and the rest of us have to, what, become vigilantes? I mean, what does it mean to you, and do you agree with it?
Again, context is everything, you know, and that particular phrase has gotten, as I'm sure you know, lots of attention. But the right has defunded, for example, healthcare. They have tried to literally defund healthcare, like not using that particular phrase, but that's what they've been absolutely doing since the late 70s, and mental health, defunding it across the board. And so I think the phrase defund the police means several things. For me, it means that we need to redirect funds. I believe that there should be a police force, right? A police force that has a union, that does not have a union, for example, a police force that mandates that officers have to report crimes when they see them, or they are subject to a crime themselves, right? We need to redirect how police forces are constructed. And as a part of that particular paradigm, we definitely are spending too much money on the police. In our city here in Los Angeles, I'm sure you've heard this, our current mayor, Garcetti, in the current budget, 54% literally of our budget is going to the police. That's outrageous.
Yeah.
More than half our budget is going to the police. That is operating the problem at the end. If we redirect those funds, 25% of them, for example, to early education, pre-K, after-school arts programs, right? Ways to engage people, and also educating people to deal with people who are unlike them. If you're a police officer, another solution. Absolutely, I would mandate that any officer in any city has to live within 10 miles of that city. Has to. So part of the funding could be for a pool to help officers buy properties, get properties, or whatever near the places they have to actually work. The reason that police are able to kill Black people with impunity is that they don't see them as their neighbors, as the guy down the street. They see them, for example, when in LA we have a sheriff system, right? As a part of that particular program, you have to work at least 2 years first in the prisons, in the jail, in the LA County jail, basically, if you're not from Los Angeles, right? So every sheriff you see on the street has spent their first 2 years working in the sheriff as a jailer. They take that attitude, because in our city, the jails are populated by Black and brown people. So after those 2 years, they then go out to police neighborhoods that are Black and brown, and they take a jailer's mentality to policing. You should not take a jailer's mentality to your job as an officer. Your job is to serve and protect. I've seen, because I was raised in a Black neighborhood, I have seen so much police violence against people. At the age of 10, Kim, at the age of 10, I had a police officer pull a gun on me at the age of 10. I've seen numerous examples of police misconduct. It was so common in my neighborhood. I thought it was legal for the police to stop you. This is a true story, and to beat you up. That's just one man's story. But I'm saying, as a man with a Black man with a PhD, who is a pretty reasonable, friendly, nice guy, I should not be exposed to a beatdown by people who are being paid with my tax dollars to serve and protect me. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I do agree that there needs to be a restructuring of police for sure. So, my first reaction when I heard defund the police, I thought, oh my gosh, you guys are crazy. I mean, I don't want to privatize the police force. That's for sure. I don't want to go down that road. But I appreciated the conversation a bit because it kind of made me rethink how police forces are used. And I realized that even though I do think it's a radical position potentially to defund the police, it's shocking enough to make us stop and say, wait a minute, okay, let's have a conversation. And the conversation is, look, what they bring up is the police are just kind of out to get us. I mean, when you think about it, when you get pulled over by a cop, they're going to give you a ticket. Even if they're just walking around your neighborhood, you see them putting tickets on your car. Even if it's little things, it's still, they're out to get you. They're out to take your money. They're not out there to help you. They're money makers trying to get tickets for the city or trying to put people in jail or for-profit prisons. It's this sort of layer of money-making scheme for the city that has created a dynamic that is not really that they're community servants, but that they're we have to watch out because if the cops catch you, who knows what, it's going to be something from a ticket all the way to jail, right? So I do appreciate the conversation because it's helped think, maybe that dynamic isn't so healthy for a community, for any community, to have this sort of animosity and got to avoid these people at all costs. So maybe this conversation of what should a police force look like? What should they be doing for the community? And I like the idea of they should be serving the communities where they live, and they must live in the communities where they serve, because then it is, culture is very different. I know this being somebody who's Asian and white, I know culture is very different. And if white people, for example, were to only police Asians, there would be a cultural misunderstanding with some of the things that happen that make it difficult. Right. And vice versa. If Asians were only policing, white people, there'd be a lot of cultural misunderstandings there. And so when you're from that neighborhood, when you're from that culture, when you know the struggles that people are dealing with, and you have more sympathy and empathy because you're there, then you can, rather than criminalize them, work with them towards a better path forward, or have a better understanding. If your neighbor,
Kim, is committing a crime, if your neighbor's kid is joyriding one day, if your neighbor potentially is pulled over, is speeding, when you stop your neighbor, it's like being in a small town when people wave. I've been to many small towns all over the country because of my book travels. In small towns, people wave. People don't really honk at you too hard, if you cut them off, because you have to also see that person in the county store, at Walmart, right?
They're humanized to you.
They're your neighbors.
Right.
So when an officer, Kim, lives in your neighborhood, he or she will treat you like your neighbor. He's a cop, she's a cop. If you're wrong, he'll have to bust you, but he'll bust you in a way that is reasonable. When the police stop black people, using me, for example, I have a PhD. I'm a reasonable guy. I've had the police call me the N-word, pull guns on me. These are traffic stops. Pull guns on me. I have so many terrible stories. Why? Because those people are not seeing me as their neighbor. They're seeing me as a potential threat as a black man. Why? Because they don't understand. Why? Because they aren't living around other black people.
Right.
Why? Because their first 2 years, if they're LA sheriff, are spent literally as jailers, and they take that jailer mentality and they bring it out when they stop Michael Datcher, who's just going to the store, and they treat me like I'm a criminal, and I am not.
Right. I mean, even in areas of the country where that's not a mandate to go and serve in the jail first, it's still, when you're not from that neighborhood, I mean, just just an example of like a young teen who maybe goes into a convenience store and shoplifts, right? If you're a cop and you're from that neighborhood and you know that kid, you say, hey, you know that kid's mom's real poor. And maybe you know that this kid has nothing and all of his friends are getting that thing that he's wanting and he doesn't have the resources for it. Instead of just busting the kid and saying, that's it, you're a bad kid, you have empathy and you say, hey, I know you're going through a hard time. I understand you're seeing all your friends with that whatever it is that you just shoplifted, but this isn't the way to do it. Let's work on how we get you this thing the right way.
That's right. And also to kind of broaden this conversation, this is more of the awkward, difficult talk to have, frankly, Kim. A major part of the issue at a systemic level, Kim, is white fragility. And not just white people, but the culture of what I would just call whiteness. At times, white fragility is demonstrated by folks who are non-white, who are police officers. Because in our culture, in our society, black men, for example, are the icons of two things, broadly, of kind of masculinity, toughness, kind of virility, and also being sexually attractive or sexually desirable, right? And those talks are difficult because it makes you think about, well, why do you think that the police are so aggressive when they deal with black men in particular? Well, because the way the men are socialized to dominate or control, when they engage black men, it's an opportunity to kind of show their toughness. It's an opportunity to kind of dominate this kind of icon of black masculinity. That has been true since slavery, literally, and it is true now today. And so what I'm getting at is that is a kind of what I would call white male fragility or white male insecurity, oftentimes tied to, quite frankly, to their sexual insecurities.
I know you and I have had this conversation several times. And, basically what you're saying is that you think that, and I'm not a man, so I cannot understand that that fragility when it comes to how men are. I know that they've got there's the stereotype of short man syndrome and they have to go and get a big truck, right? And so, yes, there's a lot of conversation around black men and the size of black men. And perhaps that is something that some white men are feeling fragile about. And so to exert alpha sort of dominance, you're saying that they're exerting a dominance because they're afraid, they're insecure.
These are tough conversations, and it's a long time systemic issue. Let me give you a little context here. There's a really important book called 100 Years of Lynching. It's a compendium of newspaper accounts of lynchings from 1840 to 1940 in this country. There's about 425 lynchings. In the old days of journalism, Kim, they would simply have there'd be an eyewitness account, and the reporter would go and talk to Kim. Kim, you were there. What happened? The whole news article would be basically, well, they brought the Negro out and here's what happened. So we have 425 accounts in one book, basically around that many, of lynchings. In almost every single case, hear this, in almost every single lynching, they cut the man's penis off. Why do you need to cut a man's penis off? That's a really important thing to make my point clear, because black male sexuality is a thing that is threatening because men are socialized to tie their manhood to being able to dominate someone and to be sexually virile. And because black men are oftentimes the icons of masculinity, including sexual power, literally as part of the white male fragility, that bucks up when they encounter black men as police, but also in other social conversations. And as I said to begin this conversation, police are just people with jobs and families, and all policemen are not bad people. Of course not. There's many great people who also have whose job it is to be an officer. But the culture of policing is very alpha male driven, very tough guy driven, very much about domination and about being in control. Mm-hmm. And because historically, including when lynchings happened, in almost every single case, they cut the man's penis off. So in a way, when you're engaged by an officer in the streets, it's all about trying to humiliate and control and make smaller. I've had it happen to me so many times. And it's very obvious they're trying to exert control over black male power.
Well, but what if the cop is black?
Great question. It isn't always as bad. If there's a mixed team, I've had that happen as well. At times, the black cop, as Ice Cube famously said in the song, will try to show out for his white partner because he has to also work with this guy every day. And it becomes kind of a black male performance when there's a black cop and a non-black cop. If there's two black cops, it's very different. It's a much more nuanced situation. But if there's a black cop and a white cop team, the black cop will at times act as vicious as the white cop, in my experience, and based out by the police numerous times.
I mean, it's certainly an interesting theory, Michael. It's certainly interesting. I mean, I think there would be, I don't know how people are going to take that, especially white men when they hear this. I will give you this. I do think every woman has been asked by her male partner, have you ever been with a black guy? That question's probably always asked.
Why is it asked, do you think?
Because they're worried about size, I would think.
Because they're fragile about their masculinity when it comes to sexual relations with their partner. And if black men are the icons, I don't want to oversimplify this. If you were to talk to 100 black men about their encounters with the police, they will almost always say there definitely was a spirit of humiliation involved. From a traffic stop, I've been stopped, as we all stopped all the time in LA, on traffic stops. In almost every single case, Kim, they've tried to humiliate me in some way. It's obvious.
Yeah.
So,
I really wish the conversation that's going on in the mainstream media and just in public discourse and would focus more on the treatment, because so much of it right now is based on the actual killing, right? But the number of killings, when you look at the unarmed number, is not that high. So,
Right.
it's like 10 to 12 a year of unarmed blacks that are killed. But that's not really the root of the problem. The root of the problem
Not
is
at
the
all.
overall treatment, and that's what you're talking about.
Yes. Right. And so if you talk, so it's so pervasive, Kim, that in black neighborhoods, we have a thing called one-time stories, right? And blacks who watch your show will laugh. A one-time story is a story about an encounter with a police officer that a black person has. Yeah, one time, it begins with, yeah, one time this cop stopped me, and the treatment is so consistently about control and degradation because the white male fragility comes comes to the fore. It's really big on the East Coast, certainly, and certainly, of course, in the South as well.
How do we get more black cops in the force?
The issue is not black cops. Like as I said before, if there's a white cop and a black cop in the same car and they stop you, the black cop takes on literally the white male fragility out picturing in terms of his behavior. And the thing is, we have to change the culture of policing. Here's the point of
Well,
mentioning the white fragility piece. We have to address that. That is a societal problem. So I told you about, we have like concrete things we can do tomorrow, like making it a crime not to report abuse by a fellow cop. The much more long-term, much more important, quite frankly, solution is to deal with white fragility at a national level. That's a hard conversation to have, but it's going to take that.
but like here in Los Angeles, the police force isn't white; it's Hispanic. It's over 50% Hispanic. I think even up to 60%, and then the rest are whites and blacks, and the next majority is white, and then
but the culture is a white male fragile. It's pervasive. Who's in charge of the police force? Who are the sergeants? Who's setting the tone? Who are the lieutenants? Who's in charge? Who's the police chief? I mean, all that's a part of the culture.
do you think maybe it's not really white, but it's more just competition?
It's certainly white, and as a part of the competition, as part of the fragile piece, there is a competition. Like when your partner's not yours, but when partners ask a woman, "Hey, have you ever had any black lovers?" That's about competition. I've
Right.
never asked a woman, "Have you ever had a white male lover or an Asian lover?" Who does that?
Right.
Who does that?
Yeah, I mean, in that case, it is only white guys that do ask that
Of
question.
course. And so there's a
But for
competition.
that,
Right?
but the rest of it, I kind of feel like there's just you've heard of, I'm sure, of the Stanford experiment where they had the
Right.
guards and the
That's right.
prisoners. And the
That's right.
guards, as they got more and more power, they started to become more and more abusive, and they actually had to stop the experiment because of the abuse that the guards were exerting. And so that seems like more of a thirst for power. That seems to happen when you get in
Maybe.
that position of power and control and dominance. I don't know if it's a
So,
race thing.
oh, it's a race thing, 1,000%. So here's a little story, a little anecdote. So as undergrad, I mean, I had such a police problem. I've seen so much abuse in my life as a young kid by the police. I really hated the police. As an undergrad at Berkeley, I began, as I walked back and forth to campus, if I saw the on-campus cops who had guns, of course, I would mad dog. I would stare them down. They would, of course, stare back. So to make a long story short, that was not safe to stare down people with guns.
Right,
So I actually
right.
went and I applied for a job. We called him a community service officer. We had a walk service. We did certain things. We didn't carry guns as students, of course. So I applied for a job as we call them a CSO. So to make a very long story short, I came in. They asked me first, so why do you want to become a CSO? And I said, because I was raised in an environment where the police beat up black people and were not good people. So I want to see if it was true behind the scenes. They stopped the interview. They're like, stop. They sent me outside. They said, don't leave though. About 10 minutes passed, Kim. They called me back inside and they said, you're hired. I worked for 18 months in the police force. And being able to see that culture from the inside it really healed me, to be honest. There were some great people who worked there, of course, but here's the thing, I saw the culture of it. Things that are said about black people, brown people, it's a culture of demonizing people of color. And when there's a culture openly of demonizing people of color as stupid or as ignorant, or as criminals, right? That culture, Kim, creates an environment where police officers are more inclined to abuse their power.
Yeah, I just when I see police and authority all around the world, even amongst people of the same race, I see this same dynamic. So for me, it's hard to pin it directly. I know in this country, we do have a historical hierarchy that was set up based on race, which is why it has continued on, and in that way. But in other parts of the world, I see people policing others and demonizing others who are the same race, but they're just maybe different in some way. And so it's more othering and it's more dominance and it's, to me, more competition based than it is purely racial.
Right, but true. So you're right about the whole Stanford experiment, of course. Certainly when you have power, it makes you engage in behaviors that you would normally engage in. However, you really can't compare America to, say, Thailand, when everyone when almost all the cops are Taiwanese, and almost all the folks that are policing are of the same background and race. Because of the history of slavery and why police were created in our country. So the police, I'm sure you must know this, the police idea comes from slave catching culture. Like, that's where we get the modern police force. It was rooted in slave catching culture, right? That idea of policing the dark, dangerous, dark being is why we have police today. And that particular culture, Kim, has remained, to a lesser degree, of course, the same.
I mean, so I would agree with that if there was only police in areas of the world where there was slavery, but there's police everywhere. Every culture has police.
Well, here's my point. So, but do other cultures have the police? For example, in LA, we have killed over 600 citizens, right, by the police.
Yeah,
in the last decade or so. But as anecdotal evidence, in other cultures, you don't see, for example, largely as a systematic year after year process of the police randomly killing citizens who are the same race. You just don't see that. Why? Because the people would not stand for it.
I don't know. I think we see that maybe in India. I know we see that in the Middle East. I think that there's when police get othering, I think is a big problem. But certainly, I think where we definitely agree is that there is a problem here in this country that is unique. It is, the background makes it unique. And what there's obviously in my mind, I think it's just obvious that Black Americans have not been able to enjoy the American dream like anybody else. Have not been able to participate in that process fairly. Right. So that needs to be corrected somehow. That's why people have the conversation about reparations in particular, is to somehow try to level out the playing field to where we can bring Black Americans into the fold and enjoy the fruits of what should be the American dream for everybody. And
so here's another solution, Kim. So practically, as you know, we live in a world now with alternative facts. The idea that a news organization, for example, can literally, or a politician can literally lie and call those alternative facts, that means that society is breaking apart. As people who are concerned citizens, we have to aggressively attack alternative facts, or basically lying from an institutional, say, news model. Here's the point I'm getting at. I feel like there needs to be an organized boycott of the folks who advertise with Fox News. A major part of the problem is that literally Fox News, at least the opinion part of Fox News, which is most of Fox News, is oftentimes saying things that are, not true, they're lying, but they're also demonizing people. And those are like kind of, I'll call them lies that are couched in opinion, right?
But aren't they allowed to have their opinion? I mean, we don't really want to be policing opinions, do we?
We need to police opinions. If I say to you, I think that we're in a theater, I think that the theater is on fire, that's against the law. You can't scream fire in a crowded theater.
Unless it really is on fire.
Exactly, because that would create a dangerous situation. And in many ways, for as Black people, Kim, because we see the impact of alternative facts lying on Black people, it helps to create a culture, Kim, where Black lives don't matter. Up until a month and a half ago, the idea of saying Black Lives Matters was controversial. That is so hurtful to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
When people talk about, as you know, in the last, it's almost a decade now, with the focus on breast cancer, save the boobies. The NFL had a great campaign. The NBA had a great campaign about breast cancer. People don't say, well, all cancer matters. When you say Black Lives Matter, that's just saying, oh my God, we're being shot in the street. Our lives matter. That phrase is controversial. Is endemic to what's happening in terms of how people view Black people. And I'm saying to you that Fox News literally is a major proponent of why Black people are getting killed by the police today. Absolutely.
Well, I mean, I think Fox News is just echoing some of the thoughts and sentiments of the people who are watching Fox News. I mean, to go back to your second solution that we started off with.
Real quick. Fox News is wagging the dog. Fox News is telling people, oh, absolutely, no doubt. Fox News is creating the narrative, for example, for their viewers who then echo that perspective back to
I mean,
the world.
there's certainly a secular sort of thing going on there. I think even with CNN and MSNBC, I mean, what happens is these media companies, they're trying to get ratings. So they go after the emotion of their viewer, and then the viewer is glued to the television because they're emotionally drawn to it. And then the media company just continues to feed them emotionally. It kind of goes around and around and around like that. I think they're all definitely doing that.
Compare Fox News to CNN.
Oh, yeah, I can. Oh, yeah, I can.
You can critique CNN's perspective. They are a news organization.
No, my gosh, they've become so opinion-based, CNN. I mean, I can't even watch them half the time. They're not saying facts either. I think it just depends on what you agree with or what you don't agree with. I mean, I think all of them are hyper emotional and trying to.
No, Kim. So as we know, there's been here's a good practical example. And so because the president, 45, has been lying in a way that we haven't really seen before in a public figure who's the president, that the Washington Post, has been documenting his lies. I think he's at like 17,000 lies. For example, his press secretary says that he does not lie. Fox News says that he does not lie. Like that's a lie to say that President Trump does not lie. CNN, for example, I'm not a big CNN fan, but I'm just saying you can't compare CNN to Fox News.
Oh, you right. I really can.
Fox News has alternative facts. I don't want to get too far.
Well, no. I mean, so I want to go back to one of your original ideas. So it was the liberal arts. So this kind of all ties in, right? So you're saying people that have, if people would study more kind of awakening sort of fields like, studying literature, or which, you were a literature professor for quite a while. And I have my degree in philosophy. So, we're coming from that liberal arts background, which is why you and I always have such fantastic conversations, I think. But, so we want to facilitate conversation. We want minds to be open to one another and hearing and listening more. But I think that also that goes two ways. It's not just listening to one side and saying, I want you to listen more because I want you to hear my perspective more. It's I've also then got to stop and listen to the other perspective. And I know I get criticized a lot for trying to listen and understand to some very even like the alt-right, I'll sit there and I'll really try to hear them out and to understand their perspective, because I don't think we change minds and I don't think we make progress when we just point fingers at people and say, you're immoral, you're a bad person, and I don't want to hear you. I want to silence you. So how would you then police the fake news?
Right. So here's the thing. So as you know, I put on public programming. That's part of what I do as a scholar, as a concerned citizen. You were, in fact, involved in one of our Real Talk, the Great Debate series. Mm-hmm. I also have a series called Art of Resistance. It's a panel-based series with scholars and politicians and folks coming together to discuss issues of the day. I also believe, as you must know by now, in listening to other sides of the perspective, no doubt. But we have to have a baseline. The baseline, Kim, are facts. You can't have a thing called an alternative fact. That's a lie.
But the difference between like somebody saying Black Lives Matter and then somebody turning around saying, no, all lives matter, that's not really a fact thing. That's just,
That's not my example. My example was the fact that, according to Washington Post, that President Trump has lied 16,000 times. Like, that's a fact.
Well, the Washington Post also lies.
Okay. Well, point those out to me and tell me, is it 16,000 times, right? So you can't compare, if that was true, I'm not sure if that's true or not, but you can't compare the Post with the president, who we know lies all the time.
But we're not going to censor the president.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying we need to be able to call out organizations like Fox News.
I would think they do get called out all the time by CNN and MSNBC and the Washington Post and LA Times and New York Times. I mean, I think they're calling them out.
Calling out simply verbally a boycott of the sponsors who support Fox News. Because, and that's really my last point, is that it's got a broad-based approach, Kim, to make a change. We need, for example, as I talked to you in the beginning of this conversation, we need to make sure that when folks see a crime as an officer and don't report it, they are charged with the crime. We also need to have, I think, have more focus on liberal arts education. But we also need corporate America to play a really important role. And we cannot allow corporate America to get off the hook. They cannot support individuals or organizations, for example, that support alternative facts.
Yeah.
That because it's leading to death. That's why I'm so impassioned about it, because I know the impact of lies about Black people the impact it has rather on police when they engage me, because of all the misinformation about the Black male subject.
Yeah.
It gets us killed. It gets us murdered in public. It gets us lynched in public. It gets a 10-year-old boy having a gun pulled on him. It gets a person in his car who says, "Hey, my hands are up," being shot by the police. That isn't an accident. That is literally an outcome and outpicturing, Kim, of the ideas, the lies, the alternative facts about Black people.
Well, I definitely understand. Look, everybody's got the right to spend their money where they want to spend it, right? So people can boycott whoever they want to boycott. They could choose not to shop at certain retails or buy certain products for a variety of reasons. Usually, though, as of late, calling for a boycott kind of tends to go and backfires a little bit, because then the other side says, we're going to go buy more. It kind of creates more of a war rather than understanding discourse and dialogue.
Why do you think people had the divestment movement in South Africa? Like, why have the South African divestment movement? Like, what was that about? Yeah,
the boycott. They were wanting to stop the apartheid, right? So they were saying we don't want to invest in the government of South Africa that's going to continue on in this apartheid. So if you withhold the money, and there's that same movement, the BDS movement going on with Palestine, exactly. Israel.
That's right.
And, certainly, like I said, you have the choice to spend your money where you want to spend it. And you have the choice to boycott. And I think back when the South African apartheid was going on and the divesting and boycotting was going on, that was a working strategy. Today, the problem with it is that it's war. It's like we're so divided right now that anytime we create more division by saying, that's it, I'm just going to boycott you until you are forced into my way of thinking, until you're forced into my way, that creates an opposite reaction, a side that then says, we're going to push back even harder, even if they were to sit down, like with the Black Lives Matter and the All Lives Matter discussion, right? Of course, like if we were to stop and instead of making it so divisive of a back and forth saying, listen, nobody's saying white lives don't matter or brown lives don't matter. We're not saying, like your example, if you have breast cancer, that suddenly thyroid cancer doesn't matter when we do a march for breast cancer. It doesn't mean, oh, well, you're, sorry about your lung cancer. I guess we don't care about that. No one's saying that. We're just saying that this particular issue needs help. It needs awareness. It needs more voices lifted in this to understand that there's a crisis going on this side. If we were to have more dialogue rather than trying to force each other into our way of thinking, I think we would make more progress. I guess my issue that I'm having right now with what's going on in society is this desire to censor in a variety of ways, including through boycotting, including through, and even we do this on a government level. I have a problem with it when the United States government does it against nations that, we go after them and we say, we're just going to sanction you to death because we don't like the way you are. We don't like who you are until you bend to our way of thinking. I don't know if that really works in the long run.
But Kim, that can't be the only strategy. But as a part of a multitudinous strategy involving police reform, involving liberal arts education, boycotting is a really important tool. It's always best seen through example. When David Duke ran for office in Louisiana, he actually won. As you may not know that, he actually won office in Louisiana. He was the Grand Wizard of the KKK.
What year was this?
I don't know the top of the head.
But what time period? Was it recent?
Oh, this is I think in the 90s.
Okay, 90s. Right? Okay.
Yeah. David Duke was the Grand Wizard of the KKK. Would you agree to boycott corporations that gave money to David Duke?
Yeah, I personally would. Yes, I would say I'm not spending my money there. Yeah.
Would you support a movement to boycott organizations? Say if it was some Southern company that gave money to David Duke.
Right, but that's David Duke's ideas are so fringe. The problem is that we're talking about half the country thinking one thing and the other half thinking the other. And when it's so divided like that, we're just creating civil war amongst one another.
David Duke was a leader of an organization that terrorized Black people and killed them in public. The police in our country, including in the last month, and have for a very, very long time, not just killing us, as we said, harassing us, intimidating us, but lately killing us on film. What I am saying is that end result is so extreme. For me as a Black man, I've got Black children, I've got a Black body myself, that a boycott of individuals who support a culture where Black terrorism is okay. Listen, that needs to be a part of a long-term
right. No, and I agree with you. I just and I think it works, and it has worked historically. I just think today's climate is so divided that right now it's only more divisive. That's my point. I'm not saying it won't work again at some point in the future, and not that it didn't work in the past. It's just that right now we're dealing with very strange times with our discourse in this country. We're very divided. We're getting killed, and that trumps everything for me. Well, Michael, thank you so much for this conversation. You're always wonderful to talk to, and thank you for being on the show. Very enlightening. Dr. Michael Datcher, thank you so much. He is the author of many books, including Animating Black and Brown Liberation. He also is the co-host of the weekly public affairs news magazine Beautiful Struggle on 90.7 KPFK in Los Angeles, as well as the host of his own online TV show called the 445 Productive Through Joy Show, which is at 4:45 in the morning. I don't know how you do that. And I will put the link down below for how you can reach out to Michael, how you can read one of his books and listen to one of his many shows. Very, very intelligent, very articulate. Thank you so much. This was an excellent conversation. Dr. Michael Datcher.
Thank you, Kim. Have a great day.